Hello and welcome. 7 years ago, at the First Parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a group of grade school students created an animation about the Unitarian Universalist seven principles. And prophetically, they didn't think that seven were enough. They added an eighth, we stand up for others, and a ninth, and for the animals. Today, in 2021, our congregation is contemplating the eighth principle. This calls us to join with other congregations in the UUA and to move towards spiritual wholeness. It calls us to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. At First Parish, we're off to a good start. We have learned to see the water we're swimming in. We have learned how to distinguish the background of systemic racism from the foreground of our own individual circumstances. We have learned that white supremacy culture is a construct that we were taught in early childhood and that pervades our lives in ways that we're not consciously aware of. We've learned to become consciously aware of that. And we've also learned that we can choose to wean ourselves away from this. And now is the time when we're choosing to help wean the world away from the notion of white supremacy, from the pervasiveness of systemic racism. Now is the time to accept that challenge all those years ago from our First Parish kids. Now is the time for us to accept the challenge of Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman and step forward to be the light. But the question is how? We're just people, and Unitarian Universalism is a small denomination. How can we rise up to affect the culture of our society and the institutions of our, not only of our church and our UUA, but of our country and of the world? How can we do that? And I have been racked, my brains are whirling on this idea. And I had a dream after the inauguration where Amanda Gorman she was COVID stress baking, and she was wearing a resplendent yellow apron. And I woke up in the middle of the night and went downstairs and found this. And so I'm going to suggest, friends, let us make like yeast and rise and bring the whole wet dough mass up with us. Now, not sure how yeast works in the human spirit. Well, I'll start out by saying it is not instant acting or rapid rise, but it does work. And I will illustrate from a story that starts back in the way back with me. After a midlife crisis, now the story took place in 2005, just to give it a timeline. I was isolated, alone, bereft, feeling super sorry for myself and focused on my own world of hurt. And to preserve some shred of self-esteem, I turned to a tech industry truism. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And I decided that I would rock being alone. And to form an implementation plan for rocking being alone, I turned to the eternal question, what would Bill Gates do? And the answer, of course, is that Bill Gates would take a think week where he would take a big stack of books and he would depart to a remote spot and read all the books and return informed, energized, recharged, and ready to do even more great things. And so in January of 2005, I used my financial privilege to take myself to somewhere remote. And So I packed the best-selling business books of 2004 into my suitcase with only one in my carry-on, along with a guidebook to the Big Island of Hawaii. And I think you can guess which book was left behind in the seat pocket. Now, by the time I landed, I was determined to fulfill a childhood dream. And so the very first morning, I set off at the crack of dawn for a place the guidebook had called Turtle Central. And when I got there, I got a great parking space and I was so pleased with myself. And I went down to the beach with my brand new bright yellow beach bag. And I realized, and then it came to me in a flash, my new underwater mask was called a dome mask. And the reason that I got it is because it corrects your vision underwater, my vision. And it's so clear, like if you could read the New York Times, at 30 feet below the surface with this mask, it was so good. But the problem was that when you take it off, you have the mask, but you can't see. So I realized I could find from the beach, I could find the ocean. But then when I was coming back, I wasn't sure I could find my beach bag. So I looked around and I saw this lovely, very distinctive rock, and I propped my bright yellow new beach bag against the rock to make it maximally visible to me. And off I went. And I had the most delightful, I swam with the turtles. I saw all the fish, and I came out an hour later, and I was like a different person. My spirit was on a glow. And when I saw my beach bag, there were 3 people, large, imposing people with their hands on their hips standing around my bag. And I thought, oh dear. Anyway, I went rushing over, and there they were, 3 Hawaiian elder ladies looking very angry. And the tallest, eldest lady in the center pointed down at my bag and she said, "Heva," which I did not need to be a Hawaiian speaker. I knew that meant not, no, that was wrong. So what I said was, "Oh, excuse me, I can't see without my glasses. Let me put my prescription sunglasses on." And I did. And I looked down at the rock and my bag, and the rock opened an eye and looked back at me. And I realized, that is not a rock. That is a turtle. And my bag is leaning on it. And I was instantly overcome by a shame and anyway, what I did was I said to the ladies, wait, I'm remembering, let me remember that. First, I dropped to my knees and I apologized to the turtle. Then I stood up and I said, "I'm so sorry. That is so stupid. I'm so stupid." And then they looked at each other and they began speaking to each other in Hawaiian. And then they turned back to me, and one of the lady on the one side, she said, "Stupid." And then the lady on the other side said, "Just ignorant." And the way she said the word ignorant, it sounded so redeemable and so hopeful. And I could feel like my cheeks were like burning, and I could feel the tears going down my face. And the lady in the middle said, "Keep your glasses on, girl." And she gave me a big smile and she said, "Watch yourself." And then she opened her arms, and I thought she was going to hug me, but she steered me into the honi, which is the traditional Polynesian embrace. And what I later learned that confers is the rights and responsibilities of the place. And the yeast that was planted, the spiritual yeast that was planted from that experience, it has never left me, never. And so here I am, 16 years later, with you, discussing the beloved community and how we can get there from here. So with the benefit of these 16 years of hindsight on the incident of resting my beach bag on the turtle, let me quarterback this story. Now, like so many stories of social justice education, it begins with justice-minded people noticing yet another one of them committing an act of oppression. And in my story, the three Hawaiian ladies executed what I'm going to call two spiritual plays, one of which took place in private, and I can only imagine, and the other one took place in my company. And what must have happened in private is that the three women connected with their spirit of aloha. They recognized and tended to their own emotions of whatever they were, and they framed the whole situation with compassion. And they contemplated their ethical imperative, which I now realize what it is. When tourists objectify the rare creatures that they have come so far to see, that not only harms their fellow beings, and the environment, but it also harms themselves and their own spirits. And this behavior must be interrupted. And so the ladies picked a person that they wanted to help, and that was whoever it was, the culprit, the owner of the bright yellow brand new beach bag. And they waited for a teachable moment. They waited for me to come back and get my stuff. And then play number two came into place. And what they did is they offered me, in the words of clinical pastoral education at the hospital, they offered me direct face-to-face feedback on my actions, focusing on what had just happened, without bringing in any, the 200 years of oppression or the environmental degradation of tourism. Not that, just what I had done in that moment, only that. And then they observed my reaction. And then they sprinkled in a little bit of salty advice. And then they sprinkled in the yeast of spiritual encouragement. And then they held space with that gesture, the honi, they held the space for me to come at my own pace into beloved community. And when I can travel again, I will go back and find that family. And I want to thank them for personally picking me out. Well, not personally, but just picking out me as a person that they were wanted to help and waiting for a teachable moment and then acting. And this example of spiritual courage in action is particularly important for a small denomination like Unitarian Universalism, because the Native Hawaiians are outnumbered by tourists by a factor of 33 to 1. And yet they hold the moral and spiritual high ground. They hold it with tenacity, and the Kanaka Maoli are very effective moral and spiritual educators. So when I see things like white people funding and staffing volunteer organizations like Reef Teach, that tells me that's a visible sign of the leavening effect of all this relentless education of Hawaiian cultural practitioners, because education works, and we know that as Unitarian Universalists. Now, to prepare for our Zoom discussion, I invite you to think about running these plays in your own life as you encounter people who are suffering from the illusion of white supremacy and the need to perpetuate systemic racism. So play number one is your interior game. I invite the spirit of life to come onto you and tend to your own emotions. Let your roots ground you and let your wings surround you. You surround yourself with love. You stir up your compassion and commit to giving life the shape of justice, and make like a first parish kid and pick out someone you want to help, and then stop and wait for your teachable moment with that person. And then regarding the play number two, the game play two, with the other person, that is, I have a kind of a controversial opinion. A lot of people say it's not productive to, when you're shedding light on a situation, to stir up heat. And I disagree with that. When you shed light by offering direct face-to-face feedback on a situation that you have just observed, you are bound to stir up some heat. And this can be good because the yeast requires heat to rise. Yeast needs a warm environment. So that's why I encourage you to observe the reaction of the person you're helping. Take the temperature of the situation and stop before the situation gets too hot, before the person gets angry, or as soon as you notice the person is getting angry. And then sprinkle in the yeast. Say the words that your spirit moves you to say, and then move on. Hold the space via a word or a gesture for beloved community, and then stop. Your job with that person in that moment is done. Humans are not instant acting or rapid rise in terms of spiritual growth. Spiritual growth takes time. So don't attach yourself. Let it go and wait for the next time. There will be other teachable moments with that person or with others. And so I invite you, challenge yourself to get up close and personal and give that moment, that feedback in the moment, and focus on your work. Those with white privilege use it to call in other white people. Make the choice to interrupt the behaviors of systemic racism and the assumption of white supremacy culture. Be the light that awakens people to their bias of not noticing the oppression, the injustice, the pain, the suffering. And into the warmth that you create with that observation, sprinkle in that yeast and go your way until the next teachable moment. Be confident in the interdependent web of co-creation. When people of conscience do their part to leaven the spirits of their neighbors, when we all begin doing this, the system begins to change. When the yeast begins to rise, what feels like a heavy morass transforms into the bread of life, which is the feast of the beloved community. And so may it be. Aloha and amen.